All right, looks like we are set for another live stream. It's been a while since I've done one properly, one of these regular live streams. I know we were on a hot streak of live streams at one point, but of course now the UFC don't really have such, interesting or exciting cards to say the least. So yeah, it's been a while since I've done one of these. But yeah, let's get going. Let's get going. Just quickly checking if everything's okay. Looks like we're set. And all right. So, as I was saying, it's been a while since we've done a live stream, and of course, the last UFC card that we witnessed was, of course, this past weekend, Kobe Sandhagen versus Song Yadong in the main event in a bantamweight showdown. And good fight. I did a live watch along for that, but it was mostly, you know, the first hour of the event because there was nobody watching that live stream, so I decided to end it really quickly. But the thing is, yeah, as I was saying, the thing is like the UFC aren't exactly putting, there aren't exactly good UFC cards to look forward to up until UFC 280. So it'll be a little hard for us, hard to focus on particular UFC fights because there aren't really as many as exciting fights as we would have been hoping for because the next UFC event that we have is of course Mackenzie Dern facing Yan Xiaonan in the strawweight main event, which is on 2nd October, 1st October rather. So yeah, no UFC this weekend, I believe, and not I believe, like there is no UFC weekend, and so why not? I just thought, why not just give this topic a try? There are many more other exciting fights to look forward to, even though there is not a UFC event to look forward to this weekend. But yeah, why not just focus on some of these fights? All right. Let me just settle in for a minute and then we'll begin. Because it's been a while since I've done one of these live streams, and on top of that, there is of course no football as well. We have the international break going on, so obviously no football going on as well. But yeah, why not just do one of these live streams, focusing on a relatively good subject, I'd say, because there are lots of exciting UFC fights that are coming up ahead that we should be looking forward to. And of course, I have noted down some of these fights. I'm going to talk about some of these fights. If you guys are joining the discussion, feel free to join the discussion. Feel free to join the conversation. We're going to discuss it in that sense. But yeah, for now, I'll be talking about some of these fights that we have in store over the course of the next few months, to say the least. Of course, I think the it's fair to say that the next exciting UFC card will be UFC 280, of course, which is taking place on 21st October. It is, I think. I'll just quickly check the date. I believe it's 21st October. Yeah. So yeah, the next UFC card is exciting UFC card is UFC 280, of course, headlined by Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev, which is of course the first fight that I've noted down on this list of which fights that you should be looking forward to next in the UFC. And of course, we're going to talk about some exciting boxing matchups that are coming up as well. I'm not really that into boxing, to be honest, because I don't really follow it that much, but as long as it's you know UFC former UFC fighter who's fighting, I will follow that fight. I'm happily ready to tune in for that fight. Is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, so the first fight that I've noted down on my list is of course Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, which I think is the fight that all of us are eagerly waiting for. the headliner of UFC 280, which is taking place in Fight Island, believe it or not. And such an exciting fight, this one, and it is for the vacant UFC lightweight championship. I mean, this, of course, has to be the biggest lightweight fight in ages. In ages. I mean, the last time I can't remember the last time we saw a lightweight fight like this. A fight of such high stakes, high measures. Because Islam Makhachev is, of course, one of the highly touted not prospects, like fighters in the lightweight division at the moment. Charles Oliveira's rise has been incredible in the UFC as of late. Of course, his wins over Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and of course, if you go back a little further, his win over Tony Ferguson as well. Of course, all those wins were so impressive. Charles Oliveira has made a name for himself, over these last few years, and of course, Islam Makhachev has been like the protege of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Sort of, sort of in the shadows of Khabib for this while. But now that Khabib has retired, of course, he is he was rather pushing Islam to fight for the championship because he was, highly vocal about Islam possibly getting a title shot, and now he has a title shot, and it'll be really, really interesting to see because this will be the closest we'll ever come to getting a potential, Charles Oliveira versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. Khabib's going to be in the corner of Islam Makhachev, and yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting. So that's the first fight that I have noted down here. Of course, we have UFC Fight Night Dern versus Jan on 2nd October. Then we have UFC Fight Night Grasso versus Vivian Araujo on 16th October. That is local time IST, I believe. But let's talk about UFC 280 for the time being. Ridiculously, ridiculously stacked card from top to bottom. You have Charles Oliveira, who isn't the lightweight champion, mind you. He had to vacate the lightweight title, of course, after controversially missing weight in his last fight. I still believe that Charles made weight for that fight, but it's what it is. So yeah, you have Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the vacant lightweight championship in the main event of UFC 280, followed by, of course, the co-main event is, of course, another very, very interesting fight that I've also noted down. You have Aljamain Sterling, the reigning UFC bantamweight champion, defending his title against the former champion TJ Dillashaw. So this, I believe, is going to be TJ Dillashaw's first fight since his incredible win over Corey Sandhagen in that return fight. I mean, TJ looked absolutely ridiculously good in that fight, considering the fact that he, leading up to that fight, that he actually hadn't fought in 2 years, was it? I believe, yeah, 2 years. So yeah, the last time he had fought was in 2019, when he lost to Henry Cejudo, um, in that flyweight fight, yeah, flyweight championship bout. That was, yeah, flyweight championship bout. So this was TJ Dillashaw's big return last year, fighting against one of the, you know, highly impressive bantamweight fighters on the planet right now, Corey Sandhagen. He went on to beat Sandhagen. Split decision, could have gone either way, but good performance nonetheless. So yeah, you have TJ Dillashaw, who's challenging for the UFC bantamweight championship. Aljamain Sterling, of course, is on the back of a big win over Peter Yan. Two big wins over Peter Yan. I mean, technically. Yeah, the first win, of course, was controversial, DQ, illegally, all that stuff. And Sterling is on quite a run in the bantamweight division right now. I mean, he's on a 7 fight win streak, is it? 1, 2, 3. So yeah, he's on a 7 fight win streak right now. His last two victories were over arguably the best bantamweight on the planet right now, Peter Yan. I mean, no disrespect to Aljamain Sterling, but I still do think that Peter Yan is the best bantamweight on the planet, and we'll get to Peter Yan in a minute. But yeah, Sterling, two back-to-back wins over Peter Yan, beat Corey Sandhagen in the fight prior to that, got wins over the likes of Cody Stamann, Jimmy Rivera, Pedro Munoz as well, big names in the bantamweight division. So yeah, Aljamain Sterling is on quite a roll in the bantamweight division, and it'll be really interesting to see how he holds up against TJ Dillashaw. That is one more fight that I'm really, really looking forward to. And UFC 280 is just looking stacked from top to bottom. I mean, should be this is the next big UFC show. It is what it is because UFC aren't really doing themselves a favor by putting up these so-called weak fight night cards. You have there are relatively no big names in the next two fight night events, but yeah, nonetheless, UFC 280 should be really really fun. We also have, like I said, Peter Yan who's fighting Sean O'Malley in a really bizarre bantamweight matchmaking fight. I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone really expected Sean O'Malley to fight Peter Yan or Sean O'Malley to accept a fight against Peter Yan. But yeah, once again, however bizarre this fight might be, I'm really looking forward to it because can you imagine if Sean O'Malley pulls off a surprise win over someone like Peter Yan? I mean, that would be really that could be the upset of the year. That could be upset of the decade, even. But yeah, that's one more fight from UFC 280 that we should be looking forward to. But I don't really have that on my list because the one fight that I think that people are really, really sleeping on at the moment and are really not really talking about that much is Benil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot from UFC 280 as well. I mean, that fight could potentially be one of the best three-round fights we'll ever see this year in the UFC. Could potentially be that because Mateusz Gamrot looked ridiculously good in that last fight. He was really good against Arman Sarukian, was it? Yeah, against Arman Sarukian. I mean, Mateusz Gamrot looked really good against Arman Sarukian in that last fight. So for him to finally get a step up in competition, to fight someone like Benil Dariush, who I believe is ranked at number 4 in the lightweight rankings at the moment. Let's just quickly check. Oh, he's ranked at number 6. Excuse me. So yeah, for someone like Mateusz Gamrot, who is, by the way, ranked number 9, fighting a high level, contender in the division, someone who I think is going to fight for the championship, that is Benil Dariush. So yeah, for this is a big step up for Mateusz Gamrot, to be honest, because with this win, Gamrot could, potentially establish his place in the lightweight division. I mean, he could make everyone realize that he is one of the big deals of this division because let's be honest, the lightweight division is stacked from top to bottom. I mean, despite the bad run of the likes of Dan Hooker, Conor McGregor, Tony Ferguson, these guys are still ranked in the top 15 and these guys are still big names nonetheless. I mean, the lightweight division is ridiculously stacked from top to bottom, and Mateusz Gamrot, I believe, is one of the dark horses of this lightweight division, and I think that a victory over Benil Dariush makes him one of the early favorites or like early contenders to possibly challenge for the lightweight championship in 2023 because I would really love to see the likes of Rafael Fiziev, Mateusz Gamrot, Arman Sarukian, and now you have Islam Makhachev. All these guys, mixing it up with guys like Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler. I mean, these guys, you could call these guys veterans of this lightweight division. I mean, Michael Chandler, of course, he hasn't been in the UFC for that long, but he is nonetheless a veteran of this sport. He is a veteran of this division. So you could call these guys the veterans of this division. And I would really love to see the fighters, who people don't generally talk about in this lightweight division. Like I said, Sarukian, Gamrot, Fiziev, even, people often sort of like tend to overlook these guys. I'm not quite sure if that same could be said for Fiziev because he has made a name for himself courtesy of his last few fights, of his last few victories. But for Mateusz Gamrot, I think he's like the biggest dark horse in this lightweight division at the moment. Honestly, I'm really excited to see how Mateusz Gamrot is going to turn up against Benil Dariush. That is one of the fights that people should be like really interested and should be really keen on watching because that fight is going to be really good. Trust me, I have high hopes from that one. Gamrot looked really good with his striking. In that last fight against Sarukian, he has good. I mean, defensively, he's quite good as well. Benil Dariush, we all know what he can do whenever a fight is taken to the ground. All right. Um, let's see. Just give me a minute. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it for UFC 280. I mean, UFC 280 has a few other big names, of course, that you guys should be like looking forward to. I'm looking forward to. I mean, you have Sean Brady, who's of course another, you know, just give me a minute. Yeah, as I was saying, so we have Sean Brady, of course, who is of course one of the rising contenders in the welterweight division at the moment. So that is another fighter that I think everyone should be looking forward to at UFC 280. You have Subeira Tukogov, who was involved, if you guys remember, in that brawl between Khabib and Conor McGregor a few years ago. I mean, very controversial name, but he's also fighting at UFC 280. Magomed Mustafaev is one more name that I think we should look forward to. I believe somewhere in UFC 280, Dominic Reyes was supposed to fight Ryan Spann, as far as I know. Not entirely sure. Is that fight scheduled for UFC 280? Dominic Reyes versus Ryan Spann? Because I'm really looking forward to Dominic Reyes fighting once again. Let's see. Okay, Dominic Reyes. His last loss was, of course, that loss to Yuri Prohaska in 2021. Three losses in a row now for Reyes. Lost to John Jones, very controversial decision that one. Lost to Jan Blachowicz, former champion. Another former champion, Vir Prohaska, current champion. Oh, Ryan Spann and Dominic Reyes are scheduled to fight at UFC 281, not UFC 280. But yeah, UFC 280, I mean, it's a good card nonetheless. The main card is look really, really exciting. I mean, like I said, the main event, one of the biggest fights of the year, has to be the biggest lightweight bout of the year. Fights like Peter Yan and Sean O'Malley, I mean, very intriguing fight that one. I mean, the shock factor, I think, is what makes it so exciting. That would be the reason why people would really want to tune in for this fight. Either you tune in for to watch Peter Yan absolutely decimate Sean O'Malley, or you tune in to watch Sean O'Malley pull off a potential upset against Peter Yan, which I think is very unlikely, but could be a possibility. Who knows? Well, Darius versus Matthews Gamrot from UFC 280. I mean, what else could be said? This is the fight that I'm really looking forward to, and the winner of that fight. I mean, I just realized that those two guys are fighting on the main card of a pay-per-view headlined by the two top lightweights at the moment. So yeah, the winner of that fight could possibly challenge for the belt next. Who knows? Maybe Bill Dariush if he gets the victory because he's ranked at number 6 at the moment. And yeah, next up we have Calvin Kattar versus Arnold Allen. This fight. Let's see. All right, here's the schedule. There we go. All right, this event rather, this fight night event is scheduled for 30th October. Um, Calvin Kattar versus Arnold Allen. Allen rather. Excuse me. Calvin Kattar on the back of a big win over Giga Chikadze, and let's quickly Google Calvin Kattar. I mean, the way he humbled Giga Chikadze was like really nice, really pleasing to see, to witness. Giga Chikadze was talking so much shit leading up to that fight. Oh, right. How could I forget? Calvin Kattar lost to Josh Emmett in his last fight. I mean, once again, very, very, very controversial decision. Even though I do think Josh Emmett winning was, I mean, that fight could have gone either way. I'm not complaining with Josh Emmett winning that fight. To be honest, I never was complaining when watched that fight live, and while I was watching it, I think Emmett sort of outscored Calvin Kattar 3 rounds to 2 in that fight. That's just my opinion. But yeah, nonetheless, Calvin Kattar versus Arnold Allen is another exciting fight. Arnold Allen, I think, is on the back of a dominating win over someone from UFC London. Why do I keep forgetting these names, man? Right, Dan Hooker. He beat Dan Hooker. How can I forget? Right, so Arnold Allen beat Dan Hooker in his last fight. I mean, he just completely dominated that fight against Dan Hooker. I mean, performance of the night as well. Um, TKO first round victory, and yeah, Arnold Allen can do has what it takes to get these victories. I mean, leading up to that TKO win, most of his wins in the UFC were, of course, via a decision, unanimous decisions, of course. His last finish in the UFC was way back in 2018 when he submitted Mads Burnell. And since then, he has gone on to beat the likes of Sodiq of Nick Lenz, Gilbert Melendez as well. He beat him in 2019. But yeah, Arnold Allen, of course, great performance in his last fight against Dan Hooker. And yeah, I mean, another good fight to look forward to because Calvin Kattar will be really desperate, I believe, to get back on that win column after that loss to Josh Emmett. I mean, he lost to Max Holloway fight prior to his win over Giga Chikadze. He was on a nice bit of momentum. He got back on track with that win over Giga Chikadze. People were like really, counting Calvin Kattar out of that fight, but he got back on track, got the win over Giga Chikadze, and then went on to lose to Josh Emmett in a very controversial manner. But yeah, once again, I think Emmett rightfully won that fight. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm expecting a lot of wrestling from Arnold Allen against Calvin Kattar because I'm not sure how Kattar can keep up the with his, Allen's wrestling attributes. But nonetheless, should be a good fight. Let's see. Another fight, the next fight, of course, that is listed in my list is Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell. And really, really, really exciting featherweight fight to look forward to. Really good matchmaking in terms of styles because, as we know, styles makes fights. This is the term, this is the saying, and these two guys sort of similar to each other's style. I believe Bryce Mitchell has incredible wrestling. Musa Evlov has also good wrestling. So this fight right there, this fight right here should be really competitive. Shouldn't be a pure striker versus grappler sort of fight. And let's quickly Google Musa Evlov. Greco-Roman wrestling. So of course, Movsar Evloev, unbeaten so far throughout his career, 0 losses. He will face Bryce Mitchell in November. I think the card is going to be headlined by the two men. I'm quite sure. Let's quickly check if that's the main event of that fight night event. Looks like it'll be the main event. But yeah, I mean, this is a really exciting fight. Now that you consider that both men have 0 losses on their record, I mean, someone's O has got to go. So yeah, Movsar Evloev, no losses so far, and then you have Bryce Mitchell as well, no losses, coming on the back of a big victory over Edson Barboza. Absolutely dominated him at UFC 272 with his wrestling. Insane, insane grappling from Bryce Mitchell in that fight. And Movsar Evloev, of course, getting the victory over Dan Ige in that fight against, excuse me, in that UFC Fight Night, Volkov versus Robbie Strike earlier this year. And yeah, he's got wins over Hakim Dawodu, Nick Lentz, Mike Grundy in his last few fights, all via decision as well. Bryce Mitchell has won his last three fights via decision. His last finish, of course, was that twister submission victory over Matt Sales, 2019 that was. So yeah, this one right here should be a really exciting fight because both fighters unbeaten. You have two rising, contenders in the featherweight division. Of course, Ivloev is ranked at number 10. Of Mitchell is ranked at number 9 in the featherweight division. So things sort of right itself. I mean, the winner moves forward and the loser takes a step back. That's simple matchmaking, but so effective. That's what I really like to see because this is such smart matchmaking as well from the UFC. Okay. All right, so that it's pretty much it for the fight night events in between UFC 280 to UFC 281 because next up we have Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira in the main event of UFC 281. Of course, one of the most highly anticipated fights of this year. I mean, people are expecting big things from this fight because people are expecting Alex Pereira to push Izzy to his limit so that they could finally see that stylistic, flashy version of Israel Adesanya, is what I'm trying to say. And I think Alex Pereira, so yeah, Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya main event of UFC 281, and I think Alex Pereira is sort of going to push Izzy to his limit. I think people are sort of making the right call here by saying that Pereira will be that guy who pushes Izzy to his limit, takes, rather forces Izzy to bring the best out of himself once again because Izzy's last few fights against the likes of Robert Whitaker, Javit Canadier, not that great. Let's just put it that way. Not that great. And yeah, Izzy could have done a lot better than what he is currently doing. I mean, we have seen a lot better from him in his past performance. Let's just take that fight against Paulo Costa, for instance. Adesanya looked really good in that fight. I mean, the classic version of Adesanya is what we got in that fight. Picking his shots nicely, staying calm, staying composed, not rushing into things, not sort of, you know, forcing, not sort of like fighting in the technical striker manner, because Adesanya has been like really technical in his last few fights. He's preferring to outscore his opponents rather than knock them out in the usual flashy way that if we're so used to seeing. I mean, it is what it is, but at the end of the day, people really want to see the best version of Israel Adesanya, and the best version of Israel Adesanya could possibly show up at UFC 281 because this is a man who has lost twice in the past to Alex Pereira. Let's not forget about that. And yeah, Israel Adesanya, versus Alex Pereira, of course, another big fight in the UFC this year. Probably the biggest middleweight fight this year. Yeah, let's just put a statement to that. Probably the biggest middleweight fight in the UFC this year. Main event of UFC 281. Speaking of UFC 281, we also have Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. I think this is a 5 round fight. I'm not entirely sure at this moment. Just quickly check. I believe this is a 5 round fight. We also have Carla Esparza defending her strawweight championship against Zhang Wei Li. So good fight that one. Let's quickly Google UFC 281. I'm not sure if Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler is a 5 round fight. I mean, this is not showing up anywhere. Let me Google it. Versus Michael Chandler. 5 rounds, is it? I think it's a 5 round fight. I'm not entirely sure. Hopefully it is. If it's a 5 round fight, it'll be really fun to watch. But yeah, Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler is another great lightweight fight to look forward to. I mean, any lightweight fight at this point is really good to look, is really intriguing to look forward to. Same goes with the bantamweight division because you just have so many good and exciting names in the bantamweight and the UFC lightweight division at the moment. I think the same could be said for the welterweight division as well, but the only problem is that the UFC welterweights aren't that active as you would love them to be. But yeah, Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. I mean, Poirier is on the back of a loss to, of course, Charles Oliveira in his last fight. He has, in fact, lost two of his last 5 fights, with both of them being wins over Conor McGregor. I mean, questionable on Dustin Poirier's resume because most people are tend to, or rather, like sort of looking past Conor McGregor's prime, which I think is the right call because obviously Conor is no longer in his prime. He didn't look good by any means in that few minutes of that rematch of that rather trilogy bout against Dustin Poirier at UFC 264. So I'm not really sure if Dustin Poirier finds himself in a really comfortable situation in the lightweight division because we know that he has lost to two of the best fighters this division had to offer in the last 3 to 4 years. Number one, Khabib Nurmagomedov. He lost to him in 2019 title fight as well. Now that and going forward, now last year, of course, he lost to Charles Oliveira in the main event of UFC 269. So yeah, Dustin Poirier hasn't exactly had the best of times or like the best of tenures against the top UFC lightweights in the last 3 to 4 years. So this fight right here could potentially be a make or break fight for the diamond in the lightweight division because Michael Chandler, of course, always brings it to the table. He's such an entertaining fighter to watch. I mean, I was wrong about this guy when he first came into the UFC. I mean, most of us were pretty much, sort of complaining, why is this guy all talk? Why isn't he fighting? Blah, blah, blah. But ever since Michael Chandler has stepped foot in the UFC, he has not been in one bad fight. The Dan Hooker fight knocked him out first round. Charles Oliveira, Chandler could have won that fight in the first round. Let's be honest, Chandler could have won that fight in that first round, but nonetheless, highly entertaining fight. Went on to lose in the second round. The Justin Gaethje fight. I mean, did Chandler really lose that fight? Absolutely not. Technically, he did, but absolutely not because that fight was an absolute dogfight. It was an absolute war. I mean, it's the fight of the year for 2021. What else do you have to say? It was pretty much what you all expected. But yeah, Michael Chandler, after that win over Tony Ferguson, he remains the favorite here for me to beat Dustin Poirier. And Dustin Poirier really has his back against the wall. I know he's just lost twice in the last 3 years in the lightweight division, but Dustin Poirier really has his back against the wall because he hasn't beaten a top lightweight in these last 3 years. He hasn't. I know he's got a good win over Dan Hooker, but Dan Hooker has, gone downhill over the years. Same goes with Conor McGregor. But so yeah, this is Dustin Poirier's one opportunity to prove everyone that he still belongs in the top of this lightweight division. He is still one of the contenders of this lightweight division. Even though I would really like to see Dustin sort of go to the welterweight division and mix it up with the welterweights. Him versus Colby Covington. I know it's not a fight that a lot of people want to watch, but I personally want to see because of the bad blood between the two men. I really want to see both of them, inside the octagon. And give us a good fight. Potentially the UFC could potentially, milk on that bad blood is what I'm trying to say. Because we know that the UFC loves to do this sort of storyline build-ups to potential fights like, Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal was one example. So I'm totally expecting the UFC to do something similar if Colby and Dustin ever fought. So yeah, as far as UFC 281 is concerned, Dustin's back is against the wall. He needs to beat Michael Chandler to prove everyone that he belongs in the top of the lightweight division because it's like I said, he hasn't beaten a top lightweight in this division. I'm not sure if he's going to beat the likes of Benil Dariush, maybe even Rafael Fiziev, because Fiziev is such a good striker. I mean, Poirier is also a good striker, but yeah, Fiziev has such high level striking. And all I've seen from Dustin Poirier in these last few fights have just been his boxing. That's it. Fiziev can, catch you from anywhere with a kick, and that could knock you out. So, yeah, all I'm trying to say is Dustin Poirier needs to get that victory against Michael Chandler if he wants to stay relevant in the lightweight division. Next up, we have Brad Riddle versus Hanato Moicano. And this fight is also taking place in the at UFC 281. Brad Riddle, of course, one of the highly entertaining lightweight fighters. He's on the back of a loss to Jalen Turner. He lost to Rafael Fiziev, man. That spinning wheel kick KO was brutal to watch. But yeah, Brad Riddle has always been in good fights. I mean, that spinning wheel kick finish came into the third round. Up until that point, Riddle was pretty much in putting up a good fight against Fiziev, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, watch out for Brad Riddle versus Hanato Moicano because Hanato Moicano looked like an absolute dog in his last fight against Rafael dos Anjos. I know he was dominated in the latter rounds, but he never gave up. I mean, that guy, the way he fought that fight, it was a 160-pound catchweight bout, by the way. But yeah, the way that he and he was taken to the limit by Dos Anjos, but still, the resiliency in Hanato Moicano is what proved that he's one of the dogs of this division. So yeah, him versus Brad Riddle is of course great. It's a great fight. It's great matchmaking from the UFC, man, because this is going to be what we call an absolute banger of a fight. There's going to be an absolute banger, no questions. I mean, pure brutality could be expected from this fight. Riddle, great striker. Renato Moicano, great striker. You could expect the two men to stand in the middle of the octagon and potentially swing at each other. And that's what we love to see from these lightweights. Speaking of lightweights, there are also two other lightweight fights at UFC 281. We also have Dan Hooker, who's fighting Claudio Puelles. And of course, Matt Frevola is fighting Otman Azaitar. Yeah, Azaitar. Matt Frevola is fighting Otman Azaitar. Another lightweight fight. Dan Hooker, desperate to get back on the win column. I'm not sure how many fights he's lost at this point. He beat Nasrat Haqparast, looked really good in that fight. I mean, what happened to that version of Dan Hooker? Last year he was beating Nasrat. What happened after that? Nevertheless, Dan Hooker, Claudio Puelles, definitely not a good fight for Dan Hooker. I mean, good fight by no means. Because Claudio Puelles is like it's one of the rising contenders in this lightweight division. Let's just put it that way. Beat the likes of Jordan Levitt, Clay Guida in his last fight, and only 26 years old. So yeah, not an easy fight for Dan Hooker, but let's see if he can pull off a victory here. But yeah, we also have Molly McCann who's fighting in the UFC 281. Look out for her. Surprising that Paddy Pimblett hasn't been booked for this card because I was expecting Paddy and Molly to sort of feature on the same card whenever they fought in the US after those two UFC London shows. But yeah, Dominic Reyes is fighting Ryan Spann. Hopefully, we could see Reyes get back on the win column because he's like one of the he's like a people's champion, isn't he? After that loss to John Jones, after the controversial loss to John Jones, he's like one of the favorite fighters of the mixed martial arts community, Dominic Reyes, especially after the way he got knocked out by Jiri Prohaska, man. Yeah, hopefully Reyes could get back on the win column. But yeah, then moving on, we have a few more fights here that I've listed down. Of course, Derek Brunson versus Jack Hermanson is another fight that I'm really looking forward to because Brunson looked really questionable slash bad in the second round of his last fight against Jared Cannonier. I mean, his gas tank, sort of gave up on him out of the blue in the second round at UFC 271, and Cannonier took advantage of that, finished him with the knockout elbows. Of course, elbow got the knockout via elbows in the second round, of course. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how Derek Brunson sort of bounces back after such a bizarre loss because I don't know. Uh, I think there were talks of him potentially retiring after that fight. He didn't, of course, and now he's fighting Jack Hermanson, who is on the back of a win over Chris Curtis. Here's the thing, though: Jack Hermanson hasn't exactly beaten a top middleweight contender in ages. Is the truth because if you go back to his fight against Jared Cannonier in 2019, he has lost six bouts. One, two, three, four, five, six. Right. So he has lost his last three fights and his last six bouts. And if you go back to his fight against Jared Cannonier in 2019, he lost that bout via a TKO second round. He then came back to fight Kelvin Gastelum, and this was a Kelvin Gastelum who was, of course, nowhere near his prime. We all know that Kelvin Gastelum was coming into that fight on the back of two back-to-back losses, Israel Adesanya and Darren Till. So he beat Kelvin Gastelum. Then he went on to lose to. Who did he lose to? Yeah, he lost to Marvin Vittori. Right. He lost to Marvin Vittori. As far as I can remember, Vittori dominated him, usual wrestling, usual grappling. And yeah, then Hermanson comes back to beat a really, how do I put it? Let's just say Edman Shabazian. Yeah, let's say Edman Shabazian. Hermanson came back to beat Edman Shabazian. It is what it is. I mean, Edman Shabazian, one of the highly weighted prospects at one point in the UFC's middleweight division, but now things aren't really looking that good for the Golden Boy. Lost his last three fights. But yeah, let's just go back to Jack Hermanson. As I was saying, after that win over Shabazian, he lost to Sean Strickland. So you could probably possibly see this pattern that Jack Hermanson has followed, throughout his last few fights in the UFC. I mean, he lost to all top names. He hasn't been a top name in the last 3 years. Let's be honest. He lost to Jared Cannonier, former title contender, fought for the title in his last fight. He lost to Marvin Vittori, former title contender. He lost to Sean Strickland, obviously not a former title contender, but one of the top names in the middleweight division at the moment. So yeah, this is a really, really question bizarre fight. It's odd matchmaking. It's a hard fight to predict, but not for the right reasons, but for the wrong reasons. Because Jack Hermanson has hasn't beaten a top name. Derek Brunson is, of course, coming on the back of that bizarre loss to Jared Cannonier in his last fight. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see who gets the better of who. I mean, if Derek Brunson can put himself, back together, if he can sort of like get back on track properly and nicely, just without a question, he's winning this fight. That goes without a shadow of a doubt. He's winning this fight. He's beating Jack Hermanson 100% if he gets back on track after that, bizarre loss to Jared Cannonier. But Jack Hermanson, man, I mean, he beat Chris Curtis in the last fight. It's not a, it's obviously not that big of a victory because Curtis still has a long way to go in the UFC. He has a lot to learn after that loss to Jack Hermanson, especially. And yeah, bizarre fight this one. I'm putting my money on Derek Brunson. I think because I think that one round you cannot define his what he has done in this middleweight division over the last few years just based on that one round. He's beat Darren Till, in this last fight, in his fight before Jared Cannonier, of course. Beat Kevin Holland, he beat Edmund Shabazian, Ian Heinisch, and yeah, the list goes on. I mean, I don't know, man. You cannot define Derek Brunson's tenure in the middleweight division just based on that one round. All right. Next up, we have Robbie Lawler versus Santiago Pontinibio. Of course, another great fight to look forward to because Robbie Lawler, I love this guy. Who doesn't love Robbie Lawler? Everyone loves Robbie Lawler. And I'm not sure if this is going to be his last fight or whatever. But yeah, let's just hope this isn't his last fight. I mean, he is 40 years old, but I really want to see him, go out potential victory, if I may put it that way, because I'm not sure if he's beating Santiago Ponzinibbio. It's a really hard fight for Robbie Lawler. And the way he lost to Brian Barberena in that last fight really makes me think that Lawler isn't getting past Santiago Ponzinibbio. And yeah, this could potentially be his last fight, because Lawler, much like much like the likes of Tony Ferguson, Cowboy Cerrone, has lost so many fights in a row, man. He lost to Rafael Dos Anjos, Ben Askren, again, controversial fight. Got dominated by Colby Covington and Neil Magny, and then he won against Nick Diaz, of all people. So that doesn't really count because nostalgia act. But yeah, people were sort of complaining that Robbie Lawler, the UFC were matching Robbie Lawler against these grapplers, these wrestlers in the form of Colby Covington and Neil Magny, Ben Askren even up to an extent. But yeah, Robbie Lawler didn't do that well against Brian Barberena. I mean, he had his moments in that fight, but he simply lost out of the blue at UFC 276 in that second round. I mean, it was the fight of the night, but yeah, Brian Barberena dominated him in that second round, and he quite comprehensively got that victory eventually, I think. But yeah, Robbie Lawler versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. I'm expecting a big win for Ponzinibbio here. I mean, he should get the job done easily, shouldn't he? Let's see. Santiago Ponzinibbio. Was his last fight against Li Liang? What am I missing? Oh no. Right, my bad. He had that banger of a fight against Miguel Baeza. He's on a two-fight losing streak. He lost to Geoff Neal and Michel Pereira, of course. Right, how could I forget that one? Fight of the night, that one. Yeah. So Santiago Ponzinibbio, he's in a situation where he needs to get the win as well. So yeah, maybe this could be his wake-up call against someone like Robbie Lawler. With a victory over Lawler, maybe this is where he finally gets back on that win column and finally starts to, secure those wins as he gradually progresses in his career. I mean, he's 35, so obviously time's running out for him if he wants to be a champion. Of course, he had that long layoff due to all the health issues, 3 year layoff. I in fact spoke to Santiago Ponzinibbio during a media day, during a virtual media day, uh, prior to his return against Li Jingliang in 2021. Big flex. So yeah, here's what it is. All right, moving on. Last fight that I have on my list is, of course, Javit Canadier versus Sean Strickland. As far as I'm concerned, this fight is taking place in the final UFC show of this year. Let me quickly Google that. UFC Fight Night 212. Is this the final UFC Fight Night? Oh no, no, no. Wait, hold up. Yeah, it is the final UFC Fight Night, or rather the final UFC event of 2021 is taking place, unfortunately, at the UFC Apex once again. Ugh, these are just so painful, man. UFC Apex shows are really, really painful to watch. There, I said it. But yeah, so we have Jared Cannonier versus Sean Strickland. I'm expecting a win for Cannonier here. Sean Strickland is, of course, on the back of a loss to Alex Pereira. Didn't go the way he planned that fight would go for him. Jared Cannonier lost to Izzy in his last fight, and yeah, Cannoneer needs to get back on the win column because I think he still has what it takes to become a champion in this division. I know that he is 38. Time's sort of running out for him. Maybe that was his last shot. But who knows? Maybe if he gets a victory over someone like Sean Strickland, he could still be in the mix because Jared Cannonier is still ranked number 2. Don't make that mistake. Robert Whitaker. I was about to say Robert Cannonier. Robert Whitaker is, of course, another name who is already in the mix as well. if especially if Alex Pereira beats Izzy. I'm expecting I'm expecting that we could see a fight between Robert Whitaker and Alex Pereira down the road if, of course, Pereira beats Izzy, because there's no one else in the top of this division. I mean, you have Javit Cannoneer. And that's the reason I say that his title contentions, his title hopes aren't exactly dead at this point. You also have Marvin Vittori as well, because these guys have been in the top of the division for quite some time now. Same goes for Derek Brunson as well. And then you have the likes of Paulo Costa. This is starting from spot number 6 in the middleweight division rankings. You have Paulo Costa at number 6, Sean Strickland at 7, Jack Hermanson 8 and 8, Darren Till at number 9, and Andre Muniz at number 10, and then we have Kelvin Gastelum at number 11. So, out of these fighters, you guys honestly tell me, how many of you think that these fighters are actually going to challenge for the middleweight championship ever? I don't know. If Paulo Costa resigns, maybe him. I'm not. I don't think he's going to resign. First of all, Sean Strickland, I'm sorry to say, he's getting nowhere near a title fight anytime soon, given the killers we have at the top of the division. Marvin Vittori is going to get the better out of him. Jack Hermanson, once again, same issue I mentioned a few minutes ago. Darren Till hasn't fought in a while, has been struggling to make it to fights. Andre Muniz is the one who I have a little hope for. And Kelvin Gastelum is, of course, I don't know why well, I mean, he's on the back end of his career, to be honest. His UFC career, at least. But yeah, then you have Nasruddin Imavov. He's one fighter that I'm really looking forward to. And I mean, it's just so weird, man. This middleweight division really lacks proper contenders. Let's just put it that way. And that is the exact reason why I say that Jared Cannonier and maybe even Marvin Vittori are still in contention to fight for the UFC middleweight championship at some point. Because Imavov is ranked at number 12. Dricus Duplessis is ranked at number 13. He's also one of the highly weighted fighters in this middleweight division who I think will go a long way. And yeah, that's it. Who else do we have? Andre Muniz, ranked at number 10. That's it. These three fighters. I mean, if you're looking at the so-called next generation, but that's the problem. Like, the middleweight division is really lacking depth in terms of, variety. Whereas if you go back and look at the lightweight division or the bantamweight division, they have such good fighters even outside the top 15. The same can be said for the middleweight division. I mean, there is a portion of middleweight fighters who are in their own league. Then you have one portion of fighters who are in their own league, and that one other portion being, of course, the champion Izzy and all of his contenders, Whitaker, Alex Pereira, maybe Jared Cannonier, maybe Vittori. All of those fighters are in their own mix. Paulo Costa, maybe. And then we have, of course, the likes of Sean Strickland, Brunson. These guys are sort of like the gatekeepers of this division, to be fair. But yeah, that's pretty much it, man. These are all the fights that I have on my list. These are fights I think you guys should be really, really tuning in for. I mean, do not sleep on some of these fights, man. Benel Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot is one of these fights that you have to tune in for. That fight is going to be so ridiculously good. The same goes for Movsar Evloev and versus Bryce Mitchell. Both undefeated fighters. Someone has to lose in that fight. Someone has to lose their someone's winning streak is coming to an end. Yeah, let's just easier terms. Yeah, someone's winning streak is coming to an end in that fight. Matthews Gamrod, Benel Dariush, like I said, from UFC 280. Who else? Calvin Cater versus Arnold Allen. Another exciting fight. Brad Riddle versus Hanato Mccann. Just watch. These are some of the fights that I think people are really sleeping on. Brad Riddle versus Hanato Mccann is going to be an absolute banger. I can guarantee. But yeah, these are the fights that I think you guys should be tuning in for. I'll just quickly read out the entire list that I have, starting off with UFC 280, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, of course, the main event. On the same pay-per-view, we have Aljamain Sterling defending the UFC Bantamweight Championship against TJ Dillashaw. Then we have Mateusz Gamrot versus Benel Dariush on the same card, and Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley, of course, questionable matchmaking, but yeah. Then we have Movsar Evloev versus Bryce Mitchell, Calvin Kattar versus Arnold Allen. Then we have Mo Sarabia versus Bryce Mitchell. Then we come to UFC 281 with Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. The same paper we will feature Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler, Brad Riddle versus Hanato Moicano. Then we move on to the middleweight fights. Fights. I said fights. I know that. Derek Brunson versus Jack Hermanson. Then we have the welterweight fight between Robbie Lawler, Santiago Pontinibio. Should be a good fight. I think should be a good fight if Lawler can keep up with Pontinibio stand up. And then, of course, middleweight fights Javit Canadier versus Sean Strickland to close out 2021. So, yeah, these are the fights I think you guys should be tuning in for. As far as the boxing side of things is concerned, we of course, do you guys know that Floyd Mayweather is fighting? He's fighting on the 25th of September, which is like 2 days later. So yeah, he's probably fighting. He's fighting in Japan. I believe he's fighting in Japan. He's fighting under Ryzen, most likely, and yeah, he's fighting under Ryzen, and he's fighting Mikuru Asakura. I had no idea. First of all, Floyd Mayweather was fighting. Like I found out literally yesterday that Mayweather was fighting this week. Very bizarre, I know, but yeah, I'm gonna tune in for that. Should be fun. Should be fun. I'm expecting Floyd to dominate, but should be fun. And of course, we have Jake Paul versus Anderson the Spider Silva. I mean, come on. That's the one fight everyone is going to tune in for. Even me, I'm going to tune in for that. I know I don't really cover that much of boxing. I don't really watch that much of boxing, but yeah, trust me, man. Everyone's tuning in for Anderson Silva versus Jake Paul. People are expecting Jake Paul to struggle with Anderson's pace, which I think could be an issue for for Jake Paul. I mean, Anderson still has the ridiculously good head movement, which could be an issue for Jake Paul. But could you imagine if Jake Paul knocks out Anderson Silva? I mean, that would be devastating. But let me remind you guys, Anderson Silva has said he's not fighting for the MMA community. It's the right call. That takes off a lot of pressure off him, to be honest. But yeah, good for Anderson Silva. He's getting the bag. And good for Jake Paul as well. I mean, step up in competition. Let's see. Let's see if people are actually going to claim that Jake Paul doesn't fight real boxers after this fight. I know Anderson isn't really a real boxer because the casuals are probably gonna say that Anderson Silva is more of a washed up UFC fighter because that's who Jake Paul generally fights. But Anderson Silva is not washed up. He looked really good in his last fight. Tito Ortiz, that is. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this live stream, man. Short live stream. I enjoyed it. I don't know how many people tuned in, but if you guys are watching this later, go ahead, drop a like, hit the like button. Only two watching. Yeah, unfortunately, man. But now that you're here, Ulkesh, that's good. Maybe we'll have more watching. Maybe you could invite your friends. I'm just kidding. What's up, though? What's up, Ulkesh? Sure, brother, sure. Ulkesh, are you excited for UFC 280? This is the pretty much the pay-per-view that I was talking about throughout this live stream. Let's see. As I was saying, of course, Really exciting fights to look forward to in the UFC in the coming few months. Of course, the next 2 weeks, or rather the next two fight nights, aren't that exciting, to be honest, because who you got? Main event, I have to say Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira is winning the main event. I mean, people can criticize me all they want for not backing up Islam Makhachev, but I think Charles Oliveira, I mean, people have been sleeping on Charles for a long, long time, including me, including me. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I did think that he was going to lose to Dustin Poirier. I did think that Dustin Poirier had learned from his mistakes against Khabib Nurmagomedov, but he didn't. He paid the price for it, and yeah, that's it. Charles is on a different level. His confidence is off the charts, and I think that is something that will be like very beneficiary for him at UFC 280. Islam Makhachev hasn't. The thing is, Islam Makhachev hasn't exactly fought a top name like Charles Oliveira. I mean, he hasn't exactly fought a top lightweight contender, is what I mean. For him to fight for this championship, I really wish that they rebooked Islam versus Benil Dariush leading up to UFC 280. That would have made a lot more sense because if Islam had beaten Benil Dariush, I think then I could have confidently said that okay, Islam Makhachev, he's looking like a legit threat. I mean, he does look like a threat. I'm not denying that, but then it would be 50-50. For the timing, I think it's sort of 60-40 in Charles Oliveira's favor, at least for me. Because let's just look at Makhachev's resume. I mean, I'm pretty sure his last fight was, I don't know, Drew Dober, Thiago Moises, all these guys. Bobby Green was his last win. Bobby freaking Green. No disrespect to Bobby Green, no disrespect to Dan Hooker. All of them are great fighters, but come on, man. Exactly, is never been in pressure match like this. Islam Makhachev hasn't fought someone like Charles Oliveira yet. He hasn't fought the likes of Michael Chandler. He hasn't fought the likes of Justin Gagey. He hasn't fought the likes of Bill Dariush, Mateusz Gamrot, or Falfizi. You can name all of these guys if you want. He's fought the likes of Bobby Green, Dan Hooker, Thiago Moises, Drew Dober. He looked really good against these guys, but if you ask me, I mean, the UFC was sort of stat padding Islam's record. That's the reason I think this might backfire really big time. Because Charles Oliveira, look at his resume recently. I mean, starting off from that fight against Tony Ferguson, he went on to beat Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, all big names, former champions. I know Chandler was a former champion in Bellator, but it still counts. Islam Makhachev, not really, man. Even Khabib, I mean, people blame Khabib for stat padding his record before coming to the UFC. They sort of blame him for fighting cans before coming to the UFC. But even Khabib, leading up to let's just say when he fought for the championship, for the vacant championship against Alia Quinta, he fought Rafael dos Anjos. He had fought Essen Barbosa. He fought Michael Johnson. I mean, yeah, he had a few good fights, but then he went on to prove himself against the likes of Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. It still counts. Those are two top names, and the way he beat them was really impressive. Islam Makhachev, I mean, he did struggle against Thiago Moises at bits. There were a few moments for him, shaky moments for him in that fight against Thiago Moises. He's been really dominant, but yeah, trust me, I think there is like a big difference in skill level in terms of skills between Islam Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is the closest we'll get to Charles Oliveira versus Khabib. So I'm quite excited for it. And it's always sort of, I don't know, weirdly satisfying when these Russian fighters get humbled. No disrespect, once again. This is what it is. I mean, Giga Chikadze, I know he's not Russian, he's Georgian, but the way he was talking mad shit before that fight against Calvin Cater is just one prime example. It is one prime example of why you shouldn't be overconfident and why you shouldn't be overlooking your opponents. Giga Chikadze was talking mad shit about Alexander Volkanovski leading up to that fight against Calvin Cater. He wasn't focusing on Cater completely. He was talking shit about Volkanovski, and he was talking shit about Volkanovski for taking an easy fight against the Korean zombie. Of course, there is a big difference in skills between Zombie and Volkanovski, but at the end of the day, you cannot focus on who the champion is fighting. Volk is the champ for a reason, and then Chikadze paid the price for it. He got humbled, big time. They say his striking is better than Khabib, but it's never tested against top strikers of the division. Exactly, exactly. I mean, come on. Dan Hooker didn't get an opportunity. He never got the chance to even, test Makhachev's striking. He got decimated in the first round, and as much as it sounds bad, that was really like a washed up version of Dan Hooker. I mean, it is what it is. I shouldn't be saying washed up. Rather of Dan Hooker who wasn't informed. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, going back, the same goes with Khamzat Chimaev, man. I mean, the way Chimaev was talking mad shit, has been talking mad shit in the lead up to UFC 279 was ridiculous. We saw what happened when he fought Gilbert Burns, so we know what's going to happen. We know what might happen if he probably fought Paulo Costa, because Costa has been like really, really, really hoping to fight Khamzat Chimaev at some point down the road after the altercation between the two. He's been calling him out left, right, and center, and I just no way. I don't think the UFC will ever put Khamzat Chimaev and Paulo Costa inside the octagon at the same time. There is not a chance that that fight gets booked. First of all, but yeah, once again, if Khamzat Chimaev wants to be this real bad gangster, all that gangster talk, I mean, why not just fight Costa? Why not just? I mean, he hasn't exactly addressed the Paulo Costa situation. Costa's been calling him out left, right, and center. Every interview has been calling him out. I don't think Khamzat ever spoke a word about Paulo Costa yet. Yeah, it's so it just goes on to show this overconfidence, man. I'm not really a fan of this in this sport because, of course, Ali Abdulaziz, mm, all the crew around Khabib and Islam Makhachev, all these guys, the crew that they have, they like to talk big game. And there's a reason for that. Of course, Khabib was never beaten. So there's a reason for that. But yeah, now they're putting a lot of pressure on Islam Makhachev by doing all this nonsense mad talking. And this pressure might eventually backfire. But yeah, nonetheless, I'm backing Charles Oliveira to win. I think he's got this in the bag. UFC 280, excuse me, UFC 280, right? UFC 280 should be really fun, though. It's a really fun card. Top to bottom, absolutely stacked. Benavidez versus Mateusz Gamrot is the fight that I'm really looking forward to after the main event. And even if like someone backs out from the main event, like If Islam Makhachev sort of fails to make weight, or maybe Charles Oliveira fails to make weight, or let's just hope that this shit doesn't happen. But let's just say one of them fails to make it to the fight, then we'll get a really good fight because the backup fighters are so good. We have um, Benil Dariush. Him versus Charles Oliveira will be really nice. It will be a really fun fight. Matthews Gamrot versus Charles Oliveira should be really fun as well. I mean, I think Gamrot isn't exactly ready to fight for the championship just yet. He needs to beat someone like Benil Dariush first to get to that championship spot, to get that championship level. But yeah, this is what it is. We have some good backup fighters for the main event. But yeah, UFC 280 is looking really nice, is what I'm gonna say. Same goes with UFC 281. Stacked card, top to bottom. When is Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva? What was the date? Let me check the date. Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva date. October 29th. What's the date? 23rd. All right. So it's at the end of the month. Should be a fun fight. I'm gonna do a watch along for Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are gonna tune in for that. I mean, people are expecting, I don't know, Anderson Silva to probably 28th October. Yeah, people are probably expecting Anderson Silva to absolutely knock the fuck out of Jake Paul. I'm not sure if that's what's gonna happen. I'm not saying Anderson's gonna lose, but I think it'll be a really close fight. But I just can't imagine Anderson Silva losing to Jake Paul, man. I mean, I'll be in shambles if Anderson Silva loses to Jake Paul. Could you imagine a YouTuber beating the greatest middleweight UFC middleweight champion of all time? Could you imagine that? An absolute disaster. But we have Floyd Mayweather fighting as well in 2 days. I had no idea Floyd was fighting, first of all. Mikaru Asakura. He's fighting Mikuru Asakura, excuse me. Exhibition fight. And I think after that, Floyd is probably going to fight KSI's brother Deji. I'm not sure what's Floyd up to these days, but yeah, he's making a lot of money. Still making a lot of money fighting these exhibition bouts. This is relatively easy for Floyd Mayweather, to be honest. I mean, these fighters obviously are nowhere near a Floyd Mayweather's level of boxing. They can be good mixed martial artists. I mean, I know the last time Floyd fought one of these guys from Ryzen. What was his name? Tenshin. I keep forgetting the name. Tenshin Nasukawa. Right. So the last time Floyd fought one of these guys was way back in 2019, I believe, when he fought Tenshin Nasukawa. And I mean, come on, man. He just absolutely toyed with him. These guys are nowhere near Floyd's level. He's just gonna make a lot of money. That's it. The same goes with his fight against Deji, if that's true. If he's gonna fight Deji, boxing can be really shit show at times. I mean, it just proves that how easy it is to make money in boxing. Eh, Anybody can do that. You just have to go out there and step in the ring, regardless of your skills. We've seen this a lot with the YouTube boxing stuff. So yeah, but yeah, I think that I think I'll keep this live stream till this much. I mean, short, had fun. Thanks to Ulkesh for joining in, and the other people who joined in between. Hopefully, we'll get a bigger crowd at some point down the road, down the future. But yeah, that's it, man. That's it for this live stream. Had really fun, and don't really know if there are exciting fights to look forward to in this weekend's UFC card because The Cody Garbrandt fight, which was like the only fight that I was looking forward to this weekend, has also been called off. So I'm not sure. But yeah, good live stream. I'll see you guys in the next one. If you guys are watching this later, do hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you like the live streams, if you like the videos. And I'll see you soon with another one of these live streams. Maybe it's for football, maybe it'll be for UFC, I don't know, but I'll be back soon.